The Canadian is a legendary passenger train that has served Canada for over half a century, and today I'm going to show you what it's like riding this stainless steel beauty, from the food to accommodations to the dark history behind it, from Vancouver and Mount Robson to the Qu'apelle Valley and into Winnipeg. It is sponsored by NordVPN, and this is where this 3-day journey begins. So good afternoon from a stunning Pacific Central station in downtown Vancouver, the home of the Canadian heading east to Toronto. Today's journey is only going to Winnipeg, but this former Canadian national station in the sunlight of plus 15, it doesn't get any better. Let's begin this journey. So this is where the journey begins. And after a quick check-in, I headed to the lounge for Sleeper Plus passengers, which features this fancy little coffee bar and a patio to enjoy your beverage of choice. And after that, I headed to the platform for the start of this incredible journey. I think it's just amazing.
Good afternoon, everyone. May I have your attention, please? On behalf of your service manager, Len Marcoux in Via Canada, it is our pleasure to welcome you aboard the legendary train number 2, the Canadian en route to Toronto, Ontario.
So as the Canadian fades away out of Vancouver, this journey east to Toronto may start here at Pacific Central, the former Canadian National Station, but over 40 years ago, this train ran further east, past Toronto and into Montreal. But this journey actually started here at Waterfront Station in downtown Vancouver, which opened up in 1914. This is Waterfront Station. It was built by Canadian Pacific Railway in 1914 and the former home of the Canadian Pacific, the Canadian long-distance train that would travel from Vancouver to Toronto and over to Montreal. But in October of 1979, the final long-distance passenger train would depart to Montreal, and then from there on they moved over to the Canadian National Station, now known as Pacific Central, as you see on the screen here, and that has been the home of the Canadian ever since. So right here, the Canadian departs Waterfront Station heading east, but this wasn't even a Via train yet. This was still a Canadian Pacific passenger train. It's the same stainless steel cars from today, but with the red Canadian Pacific paint, and this train ran 2 routes. One that does the same route that Via offers today, and that's Toronto to Winnipeg, west to Saskatchewan, Edmonton, Jasper National Park, Kamloops, and finally arriving in Vancouver. But the second line they used to offer would run parallel with the Trans-Canada Highway and depart daily from Vancouver, heading east through the Canadian Rockies to Lake Louise and Banff, on to Calgary, Regina, into the heart of prairies in Winnipeg. By the way, Winnipeg also had 2 stations, Union Station, which you can see today down Main and Broadway, and the Canadian Pacific Station off Higgins and Main. The train would then head east to Thunder Bay and finally arrive in Toronto at Union Station, but this route is gone. It was January 14th of 1990, and the current Conservative Canadian government had decided to cut passenger service by 52%, and this would be the final run of the traditional Canadian ever made, despite protests and the fact that in 1989, only 170,000 passengers went through downtown Edmonton Station and over 500,000 went through Calgary and Banff. They decided to cut the Trans-Canada line, instantly wiping out billions of tourist dollars to towns like Field, Golden, and Revelstoke. These towns were literally built along the passenger route in the late 1800s when the Transcontinental Railway connected Canada coast to coast for the first time. And it was so important that it's even on today's $10 bill here in Canada. But on January 14, 1990, the Canadian would take Morant's curve, the same curve on our $10 bill, for the final time. Now, it's rumored that this choice was made because all the Conservative politicians in Parliament at that time lived along the Jasper and Edmonton route, and they wanted to have access to the train along with all their friends. But 30 years later, there is no evidence supporting this, which is unfortunate because I think bringing back the Canadian Pacific route and the southern tracks could make rail travel possible for so many more communities along that route. So it's about 3 in the morning right now. Hopefully you can hear this, but one of the problems with the Canadian is that it's 7 years old. The wheels screech and squeal like crazy, and I think my cabin is actually right by the wheel. Hopefully they can find a way to get the wheels to stop squeaking and I can go back to bed. Because the bed is comfy, although I am a huge human being, it is a little bit difficult sometimes to fit my feet in the bed. Overnight, our train got stuck behind a few freight trains, so we're rolling about 5 hours behind schedule this morning, which meant we were still rolling through the beautiful Okanagan en route to Jasper later this afternoon. Morning from Kamloops and a completely empty park car. Now this is Craig, and he lives in the small town of Valemount, British Columbia. But this here is the station stop. It's a sign on the side of the road, and I think it speaks to how rural this route really is. But after we departed Valemount, we got into one of the best parts of this trip. The deep valleys surrounded by snow-capped mountain peaks, but the best was yet to come, because this is the moment that you hope to see on the Canadian. Mount Robson is the tallest mountain peak in all of North America, but what's really special about it is that it is so high up that on average, it's only visible for 25 days per calendar year because it's surrounded in cloud cover. But today was one of those 25 days. After we left Mount Robson Provincial Park, we'd begin winding towards Jasper, Alberta. Now, this is my 8th time taking the Canadian, and I have never seen Jasper so clear and so beautiful on a jet blue sky day like this. I don't think I've ever seen Jasper on a day this beautiful before. Look at this. So 5 hours behind schedule meant it was a quick 45-minute stop and we were on the move again. And the departure out of Jasper is stunning. The valleys within the mountain ranges begin to deepen and flatten out. The evergreen trees become more scarce. Wildlife start to appear alongside the tracks. And as we bend around and out of the Brule Tunnel, this marks the end of the Canadian Rockies and into the valleys of Alberta. All right, so these are the communal showers on the Bud cars, on the, I guess, sleeper class cars for Via. So super tiny, super small. This is really all there is. I guess you could say part of the problem is just like how tiny this shower is. It's pretty small. Now, I showered because dinner was coming up quickly, but when the Canadian Pacific built the Continental Railway, they didn't believe a dining car would catch on, so they built luxury hotels across the country at all major stops. And they did this to split up the journey. Hotels like the Fort Garry in Winnipeg, Hotel Vancouver in Vancouver, and Banff Springs in Banff, which serve as the dining options, just to name a few. But when Canadian Pacific introduced the Canadian in 1955, they introduced dining cars, and they would name these cars after the hotels they built earlier that century. The Royal York outside of Toronto Union Station, and the Alexandria Hotel in Winnipeg, which was demolished in 1971, and the Canadian Pacific station attached to it now hasn't seen a passenger train in almost half a century. But let's talk about dinner tonight. So this is the old dining car. This is what the chefs would have worked with back in 1955 up until recently when they re-renovated the dining car, which looks like this. This is the new Annapolis dining car, recently renovated, and the Via staff allowed me to tour it. Now, I find it crazy how the chefs are able to produce 5-star meals, 3-course meals out of this tiny kitchen, all on a moving train. I mean, the butternut squash soup, cream of mushroom, chicken noodle, they were all fantastic. I mean, for breakfast, my eggs were always perfectly cooked with no color on them every single time, and I know breakfast is simple, but it's extremely underappreciated. The desserts, yes, they're not made in-house, but the carrot cake, cheesecake, and the chocolate cake are heavenly amongst the other studs in this lineup. But dinner is where the culinary team shines. Rack of lamb, chicken supreme, beef tenderloin, and the prime rib dinner. This is all a part of the culinary experience on board Via, and manager Len, Claude, and Chef Stewart, and the serving staff have all made the Canadian easily my favorite restaurant to eat at, period, regardless of the fact that it's on track. The dinner on the Canadian does not get any better. Carrot cake, cheesecake, steak, chicken. It is a fine dining hall here on Via Rail. But let's talk about the story behind these cars. All sleeping cars are named after historical people, from David Thompson exploring the Columbia River to General James Wolfe defeating the French on the Plains of Abraham in 1759. But the park cars are named after the national parks in Canada. In the park car, you get the signature on top of the train viewing area, but you'll also find an all-you-can-drink coffee and tea bar downstairs. Now, Via's coffee is pretty weak, and I mean, it's pretty bad. So historically, whenever I travel on Via, I bring my own coffee Chemex, bean grinder, and beans to make my own coffee, but I forgot it on this trip. So speaking of coffee, fast forward to the next morning. We were just past the Saskatchewan border, heading into Saskatoon. So this is Saskatoon Station. This is the 3rd station that they've had in Saskatoon. But in 1980, when the Canadian Pacific got to hand off the Canadian, CN decided that they were going to only use exclusively CN stations, which is why you see the Winnipeg station on Higgins gone, the old Saskatoon stations gone. Very beautiful stations, by the way, as you can see here on the screens, with the only exception being Toronto's Union Station in downtown Toronto, just outside the CN Tower. That is the only major Canadian Pacific station still in use in the Canadian today. But just a shame, because again, it's a sad reminder that the Canadian really is a skeleton of what it used to be in the glory days when rail travel was exclusive, it was luxurious, and it was an experience that everybody should have. And still to this day, I think everybody should have an experience on rail travel. It's just unfortunate that it's not as amazing as it once was, but I still love it. Now, Melville, Saskatchewan was named after Charles Melville, who was the founder, one of the presidents of Grand Trunk Railway in the early 1900s. And one of his biggest accomplishments was building and headlining the operation to build the Fort Garry Hotel in downtown Winnipeg, right across the street from Union Station. Unfortunately, he died in the Titanic. He went down with the ship in 1912. So after he passed, they named the city of Melville after him. So we would depart Melville towards Manitoba, and the fields of Manitoba, specifically in the Qu'apelle Valley, is my favorite part of the trip. I don't have a reason why, I just find it beyond peaceful. And as the sun set on this incredible journey, we would finish it out with an incredible prairie sunset as we entered Port-Isle-Prairie, which meant we would pass the final grain elevators and a bit of prairie fields before we would cross into the city perimeter into downtown Winnipeg for our final arrival. And as we arrive in Winnipeg, I want to thank today's video sponsor, NordVPN. Anytime I go online, I use NordVPN because nowadays all websites are trying to track you and collect your personal information. So I turn on NordVPN to hide my IP address, keep my information encrypted, and I turn on their threat protection to keep cyber threats at bay. If you use public Wi-Fi while traveling or are looking to stream your favorite sports for free, you have to get NordVPN. Nord keeps me protected so I can surf the web and watch my favorite sports worry-free, and right now Nord is currently having their birthday sale special. So every purchase of a 2-year plan, you'll receive an additional subscription time for free when you tap on the first link in the video description on this video at nordvpn.com/TravelOilers, and you will get the best pricing that Nord has to offer. It is risk-free and worry-free with their 30-day money-back guarantee. Again, at nordvpn.com/TravelOilers, and I want to say thank you so much to Nord for sponsoring this video. Now, how much did I pay for this ticket? Well, traditionally berth sleepers will run you about $1,000 for a lower berth and $800 for an upper, but I was blessed enough to get this trip for free, not because Via sponsored me, but this man, Ross Johnson. Now, Ross is the record holder for taking the most trips in the Canadian with 136. He was even thanked by the Via Rail president for his commitment to train travel, but as you can imagine, Ross has amounted countless amounts of points for his travels, and he enjoyed my previous train travel vlog so much that he wanted to pay it forward and gift me this trip to further spread our mutual love for train travel in the Canadian. And he also gave me a few drone shots to use in this video to help tell that storyline better. So to Ross, thank you very much for our friendship. Thank you very much for gifting me this trip, and cheers to the greatest train journey on earth, my friend. I just want to say thank you so much for watching this video on the Canadian. Have you ever taken the Canadian, and if so, was it the CP Canadian? Let me know, I'm very curious. Hit the subscribe button for more videos like this, although I do play professional hockey for a living. I love posting travel vlogs like these from time to time when I do get the chance to do so, so please hit the subscribe button for more of those, and look forward to hopefully seeing you in the next one of those. Peace.